You're watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.
What's up, everybody? Let's go. It is the beginning of the Leafs season, a.k.a. the NHL season, a.k.a. Toronto Maple Leafs. We're here on
Too
Toronto
many
Sports
AKAs.
Rush. Welcome on in to Toronto Sports Rush. This is the center of the universe where the Toronto Maple Leafs are the gem of which Dan and I are so excited to be able to talk about and bring you a preview episode. And Dan, I think you are the most excited about the Toronto Maple Leafs getting back on the ice, getting into the action.
I'm Dan, a.k.a. Toolsy.
A.k.a. Dan.
Binks, I'm just glad to see you. I'm not glad summer's over, but it's bittersweet when summer ends. Hockey is here. All the sports are back. So our little summer refuge, our little summer hiatus, that's done. It's now back to work, baby.
Back to work. Back to work. We're back in school. Also, it does feel like summer out, though, right now. Kind of.
Oh, my goodness. It is so beautiful. It's that October where the weather where you have the leaves changing. If you have the sun perfectly, it feels like a summer day, but then you feel the cool autumn breeze. You smell the leaves. If you can bottle it up, which I think they've tried to do, and they made it into
you can buy that
potpourri,
anywhere, really.
And it doesn't smell like the actual scent. They have not perfected that yet.
Well, it's pretty perfect. I think it's a little too hot for my liking right now. I'm in New York City. Dan's outside of Toronto, so we're technically not in Toronto, but that means we have a better perspective of Toronto. Is my
Here's how it is, Binksy. It's like if someone's doing a puzzle or Scrabble or a crossword. They're too close to it. Okay. Once someone comes in that has an outside vision, you see it and you're like, hey, that's what you're missing there. And you're like, I didn't see it from that perspective.
That is a great analogy. Like when you're doing a puzzle and you're so deep in it and someone swoops in and is like, boop, 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 boop. Yeah. That's great. Okay. So Dan, I mean, one thing about this Leaf season that you're excited about, because wait, before you go, the last time I was talking about the Toronto Maple Leafs, I was watching them in a bar in New York City, and when the Bruins scored in overtime, I ran out of the bar. I ducked and I ran, and then I ran home, and I cried to my mom on the phone. I'd had a couple before then, but it was not a great end to the season, so I'm feeling a little more optimistic about not having that experience.
So Bigsy, I don't root for the Leafs. I'm not a Leafs fan, but I am surrounded by Leaf fans, including my mom, who's a massive Leafs fan. So I want them to succeed. I want the pain to be over. But here's something I say at the start of the year, during the year, at the end of the year, every Leaf season. I honestly think that deep down in Leafs fans' bodies, in their subconscious, they like the losing because it gives them something to talk about. And if they won, they wouldn't know what to talk about. I think deep down they like this. They like being the team that never wins. They like always talking about it. They like always talking about next season and how it's going to be different. It's part of their identity.
If the Leafs won, fans would be insufferable, right?
Yeah, but then they wake up the next day, they're like, now what?
Right. Well, at least for that one game.
Again, this is my philosophy. It's probably nowhere close to true.
No, but it's like Chicago Cubs, right?
Yeah.
That was like their whole identity and their fans' identity, and then they won, and it's like, now you're just another team.
That's right, Binksy. Sorry, I'm holding a screwdriver because I needed it.
You just got so excited. You're like, yes.
No, I needed it because it gets so humid in the basement that the drawers on this desk, they weld themselves shut because the wood expands.
Dan, what? Are you in you just got a sauna on in there or something?
Binksy, I'm in a basement that's almost 200 years old, so there's lots
I forgot. You live in Pioneer Village. Okay, well, it looks like we are really excited about Toronto Maple Leafs season, and guess what? This is going to be your home for all of Leafs action all year long. This is Dan's dream job right now. Finally, you've made it. You've peaked in your career. You get to talk about the Leafs all the time, and today we're very pleased to have an awesome guest join us, too, who actually knows something about the Leafs. It's NHL season, folks, and that means we are talking all things Toronto Maple Leafs, the center of the universe, of course. And for that, we are very pleased to welcome on former NHL executive, analyst extraordinaire, Pierre McGuire, right here on Bet Rivers. Pierre, thanks for joining us to help talk all things Toronto Maple Leafs.
Julie, Dan, I'm so excited to be here. And it's an exciting time of the year, obviously, with the National Hockey League starting up, college hockey starting up, major junior starting up. It's almost like Christmas, except it's October.
Pierre, missed you, buddy. Whenever people ask, they say, what was Pierre like? And I can honestly say this, I'm not pandering to the crowd. Pierre, you were always so awesome to Jay and I. Wherever we saw each other in the world, it was rarely in Toronto. You were just so nice to us. So I'm always thankful for that, my friend.
Well, I am thankful for the relationship I had with you and Jay, by the way. And it was a ton of fun. It was never boring. I think I was Jay Onright's first ever national partner.
You were.
At the NHL Network, I believe. Yep. And we had a ton of fun. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I was his first ever partner.
How? Like you were his co-host?
Yes, at the NHL Network. We worked together, and we had the graveyard shift. So we'd start probably around 10 o'clock at night, and we'd go till 2 in the morning.
Wow, The things you learn. I didn't know there was anyone really before Dan.
No, that was when Jay was just getting his feet under him. Pierre, you mentioned it's almost like Christmas. When it comes to Canadian teams, we have to talk Toronto Maple Leafs. And the biggest thing going in is Auston Matthews, new captain.
He's the new head coach.
You've been around hockey a long time. Does the changing of a captain or who is captain really affect a team that much?
It can. It sure can, especially in a major media market, Dan, like Toronto, where everybody, and Julie talked about it, it's the center of the hockey universe. So here's how I would look at it. John Tavares was drafted by the New York Islanders. John Tavares is a kid that grew up in the Toronto area, but he wasn't raised as a Toronto Maple Leaf. He was a fan of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Auston Matthews is a kid from Scottsdale, Arizona. He was drafted by the Toronto Maple Leafs. He's been raised as a Toronto Maple Leaf. The fans in Toronto take him as one of their own because he's a pure Leaf. He's not half of this and half of that. He's a pure Toronto Maple Leaf. And he's one guy that really understands the Toronto market media-wise. I'll never forget doing an interview with him at an outdoor game at BMO Stadium. It was between Detroit and Toronto. And at the end of the game, I was standing at center ice with my skates on talking to him. And I said, Auston, there's a Mario Lemieux cool to your game, even though you're a lefty, he's a righty, that I think most people don't understand. And he said to me, wow, that means a lot to me, especially playing in Toronto. Mario saw that interview. He called me the next day. He goes, I see what you're talking about. That guy's really cool. He's a cool guy. And I think that resonates in the Toronto marketplace. I really do.
Wow, I love that story and also the reminder of when you did interviews on skates because I love that. And then also I had to do an interview on skates recently and I kept thinking, don't fuck up. Like, don't fall. You don't want to be the story in that situation, even though you know how to skate. But back to your point about Auston Matthews, is it not kind of awkward at all in the locker room because John Tavares is still there?
I went through this once in Hartford when I was coaching. Brian Burke was our general manager, and he decided that Pat Verbeek was going to be our captain, and Randy Ladouceur was not going to be our captain. And both those guys were true professionals. It didn't really make a difference in our room, positive or negative. Even though Pat did a good job, Randy never pouted. He was a true professional. When I think about John Tavares and all the time I've had a chance to be around him, whether it was over in Russia with the 07 Super Series team or in Pardubice at the World Junior or all the playoff games I did when he was with the Islanders, Julie, he's not a guy that's a me guy. He's a team guy. I don't think it's going to be awkward at all. In fact, I think John has handled everything unbelievably well so far.
The Toronto Maple Leafs are a team that, have they become numb to how it goes for them in the postseason? Because you look at the Edmonton Oilers, and I just saw a clip yesterday of Connor McDavid losing his mind in the locker room. Like, wow, that's passion. That's something I've never seen from Connor McDavid. And they make it to the Stanley Cup final. So now they have a goal in which, okay, we made it there, one more step. While the Leafs, their goal is what? Guys, let's make it to the third round. I know obviously they aren't thinking that, but have they become numb to their misfortunes and their stumblings in the playoffs?
Possibly, but I think that's why Brad Treliving was brought in. I think that's why Craig Berube's been brought in. I think that's why Lane Lambert's been brought in. Mike Van Ryan, and then Mark Savard to work with the power play. They've made some pretty substantial changes. And Dan, somebody you, Julie, and I know very well, Keith Pelly, has been brought in to oversee everything. So I think they're trying to kick the numbness right out of the whole situation. It's a very important job, obviously, that Keith has and what Brad Treliving has, and obviously what Craig Berube has. I do think they were stumbling around because they were overanalyzing everything. I think that's out the window now. I think Berube coming in is going to be a breath of fresh air. And I can tell you, I've done a lot of games that he's coached in. He can be nasty, and those guys are going to find that out. I don't think they've had that since Pat Quinn left there. Even when Mike Babcock was there, people thought he was nasty. He wasn't nasty like I think Craig Berube can be.
Let me just point out, Keith Pelly hired me at our old network, so I'm just hoping that phone rings one day, because here's my philosophy. I've always said this, Pierre. Put me in as GM. What's the worst that can happen? My name is out there, Keith Pelly.
I think a lot of bad things could happen,
now,
but it would be entertaining.
Though, Julie, what worse could happen? Come on, they don't make the playoffs? Oh, well.
No, like the team ends up just like going away, like
falling off a boat,
waste all the money and it's gone. Like, yeah, I don't know. You burn the place down.
There is a possibility of that. Correct. Okay.
But I'd be curious. Let's take a positive spin on everything, because we know there's a lot of the masochism that everyone hates. Like, Leafs fans hate it, but they love to hate watch. What's maybe a positive you would feel or say to Leafs fans about heading into this season that you think might be a bit different this year?
Well, Julie, last year they scored 303 goals, which is really impressive. Anytime you get over 250 goals in an NHL season, your team should make the playoffs. They had 303. I'll use an example. The Boston Bruins had a tremendous year last year. They scored 267 goals. So the offensive firepower is really relevant in Toronto. That's the kind of style they play. Matthews at 69 goals. I think Nylander will have a huge year. Marner should have a huge year. He's going into a contract year. But I think they've got some assets. I'll give you an example. Nick Robertson had a huge preseason game the other night. I expect Nick Robertson's going to be one of those depth scorers that's going to provide a lot more offense. I look at Matthew Nyes, and let's just say he plays with Mitchell Marner and he plays with Auston Matthews, Julie. I think he's going to have a massive year. You could be talking about 25 to 35 goals for that guy if he plays with them with regularity and stays healthy. So I think the offensive part of their game is very positive. This is where I think they did get better as well. Their goaltending position, basically combined between Joseph Woll and Anthony Stolarz, pays $3.5 million combined. Well, that gives you a lot of roster flexibility going forward, and that's really good depth and goal. Anthony Stolarz might have been one of the steals of the summer when the Toronto Maple Leafs got him. I think you're going to be really surprised by how well he plays. And, I think Toronto, with getting Christopher Tanev, made a huge move on defense, because it gives them a matchup capability they haven't had, and it takes a lot of pressure off of Morgan Riley. I like the stuff Toronto did in the offseason. This is the most optimistic I've been about Toronto, Julie and Dan, in a very long time. I'll tell you that right now.
Well, there's some positives, Julie. Yeah. You were looking for those. You also mentioned the preseason, Pierre. I am happy to admit, in my entire life, I have never watched a second of preseason sports in any sport. What? So can you sum it up for me? What did I miss? I think everyone got injured, right? That's all I keep seeing is, yep, this guy got hurt, this guy got hurt. Anything I missed?
No, in fact, the injury situation is something that a lot of people are talking about. I think Julie would second that, but I'm concerned about the injury situation. Just in one game in Montreal the other night, we saw Tommy Shabbat go out, we saw Tim Stützle go out, and we saw Brady Tkachuk go out. That's three really important players for Ottawa. Now that supposedly they were all back practicing yesterday, but the point is that we're seeing more and more injuries in preseason that we haven't seen, and it's not like pulled groins and it's not like hip flexors. There's significant injuries or potential for significant injuries. So I think the league's got to look at that. I think they will look at it with the competition committee, and I would not be surprised to see them go down to 4 preseason games and try to add 2 more regular season games. So it goes from 82 to 84 in the regular season, and goes from, when I was coaching, it used to be 12 preseason games.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. Wow. But you know what the dirty little secret on that is, and I know I'm going to date myself, back in the day, if you had superstar players like we had in Pittsburgh with Mario or with Kevin Stevens or Paul Coffey or Larry Murphy or Joey Mullen or Jaromir Jagr, we used to go and we'd sit up in Colorado and Denver, and we'd get paid all this money, a lot of money, to go into Sacramento, California, or go into Houston, Texas, or go in to Vegas. We'd go to all these different places, and we get paid a lot of money. And the reason why they do it is because it would pay tons of expenses for the whole season. Really would. They don't have to do that anymore because the TV money's better. But that's what we used to do, and that's why there used to be so many preseason games.
Well, Dan didn't watch any of them at all, 12 of them, and you were on TV nationally for 100 years, Dan. That's an incredible broadcasting feat. And Pierre, you mentioned goaltending, defense, and offense. So in essence, the Leafs they've pretty much checked a lot of the boxes that they had been deficient on before. Where would you then say you predict, based on, absolutely nothing, knowing nothing going forward from this moment on, which is a Friday heading into the regular season, where do you think they're going to end up this year?
I would say that they've got a real chance to win the Atlantic Division, which is a division that they're in, ahead of Florida, the defending Stanley Cup champs, ahead of Tampa, and ahead of Boston. I do believe Toronto can be ahead of all those teams. What it comes down to is, Julie, what Dan talked about before. Can they get deep into the playoffs? And I think you're going to find out, I would say probably by the Christmas break, just where the Toronto Maple Leafs are. You're going to see how sturdy they are. You're going to see how robust they are defensively. You're going to see if their goaltending tandem can match up. And we're going to see if that offensive prowess that I was alluding to really is legit. And I think it is. I would not be surprised to see the Leafs score 320 goals this year. I would not. That'd be significant. And if they can take their goals against down maybe 7-10, they're winning the division going away if they can do that.
Pierre, you said you didn't want to date yourself before. I'm going to date myself here because a lot of fantasy drafts are going on right now. And my buddy, I was talking to him. He's like, yeah, I got my fantasy draft tonight. I said, well, I'll tell you, young buck. Here's how it was back in the day. When Gretzky and Lemieux were in the league, there was a few years where you could not draft them because it was such an advantage to have one of them on your team that Gretzky and Lemieux would go undrafted because of the advantage they gave to those teams. That's dating yourself when you got to see those two guys in their heyday.
No, that's fair. One of the real privileges I had is obviously to be around Mario for the two cups in 91 and 92. And people ask me all the time, what was it like to coach Mario Lemieux? And I tell them all the time, you don't coach a player like that. You're like a mechanic. You make sure there's air in the tires, the gas tank's full, and all the fluids are perfect. You don't get in the way. If he asks you a question, make sure you have an answer. We used to go into Boston a lot, and they used to play Big Bobby Sweeney against Mario a lot. So we would break down the tape and show Mario the strengths and weaknesses of the way Bobby would play against him in the face-off dot, the way he'd play against him in the neutral zone, the way he'd try to forecheck, and the way he'd play in his own zone. And all we had to do is show it to Mario. He could decipher the information and break it down himself. But you don't coach players like that. You maintain them. That's probably the most important thing a coach can do with a superstar player.
Is it a real quote from Mario? He was once asked how he gets ready for training camp, and he said he stops getting mayo on his clubhouse sandwiches at the golf course.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you a story, Dan, that will disprove all of that. And Julie, you will appreciate this. So in 1991, we had won the Stanley Cup. Bob Johnson got ill. He got brain cancer and eventually passed away. So Scotty Bowman took over as a coach. And I was actually supposed to go coach our farm team down in Muskegon, Michigan. I get a call and they say, no, you're taking the extra guys, and Mario was one of the extra guys, out to Vail, Colorado, where training camp's going to convene in about 3 or 4 days. So I'm like, okay. So we all fly out together. Our plane's late. We weren't on a charter. We were flying U.S. Air commercial. So we land in Denver at the old airport, and we get on the bus. And before we get on the bus, I call Scotty and Craig Patrick, and I say, we're about an hour and a half late. Do you still want me to run practice? Scotty goes, damn right I do. It's training camp. Get those guys on the ice. So I don't say any more, and Craig backs Scotty up. So I go to Mario, and I said, his nickname is Ace. I said, Ace, we're going to have to practice. Is there anything I can do to make sure it's easier for you and the guys? I learned that from Bob Johnson. Treat the star players with some respect. He goes, yep, get us some food. So we pull the bus over to a fast food place, and I don't know which one it was. I apologize in advance. We go on, you see all these big guys coming out with hamburgers and french fries and all, the perfect pregame meal, right, Dan and Julie? The perfect pregame meal. And we get to the Evergreen Lodge in Vail. We all go to the rink right away, check in, go right to the rink. You ask any player. Jaromir Jagr was there. Kevin Stevens was there. Paul Coffey. Ask any player. Mario said to me, if we get food, I will not let you down. He put on a show that day, that afternoon. I wish there were cameras there. Everybody would have been mortified how good he was. He didn't need the mayonnaise on the salad or anything on the club sandwich. He was so ready to go. It was unbelievable. The show he put on, to this day, we had a reunion 3 or 4 years ago. The guys were still talking about it. It was pretty amazing.
Wow, I love it. I mean, Pierre, you have so many great stories. We would love to just get into them even more. And I'd be so curious how the days you were with these guys, how much it relates to now. But we can get into that later on in the season. Right now, we know we're excited for Puck Drop, as all of these preseason games Dan has not watched, and he's excited to see the Leafs take on the Habs, which will be a little bit of potentially bad blood. We'll have to see when that ends up happening. Pierre, thanks for joining us. It's just a real pleasure to be able to have your insight on the Leaf season.
Julie, thanks so much. Dan, really good seeing you. Thanks a lot for having me, you guys. Hopefully see you soon.
Thanks, Pierre. You look like $1 million, buddy.
Just got done working out. Send me the $1 million, Dan. I'm ready. Send me the $1 million.
Hey, at 2 minutes for looking so good. That Rocket commercial, I watched it the other night. It's still the best. Thanks,
awesome,
buddy. Just to clarify, Pierre did not tell me if that quote was true or not about the mayo.
You dodged the question. A classic Sidney Crosby.
Pierre, though, if you meet Pierre in person, because some people have lots of thoughts about Pierre, they're like, oh, he's too boisterous, whatever. I'm like, he's just a great guy.
Yeah.
Honestly and truly,
super
he's a
nice
good guy.
I personally have always loved when he talked about where guys were from, because I felt a connection to that. Because whenever I watch TV, like the Leafs or like hockey, I always am like, that guy played with the Swift Current Broncos. That guy played with the Prince Albert Raiders. Like, I feel like I am female Pierre.
Something just fall there.
I know that's New York City, baby.
And Pierre is also the owner of one of the greatest rinkside interviews ever. The one with Phil Kessel. He says, "How's your breath?" And Phil says, "Oh, it's pretty bad, eh?" When he was actually talking about if he was winded. That clip will live forever.
Oh yeah. Anything with Phil, too, as well. And also, Pierre eating the corn dog is one of my favorites, the Winter Classic, when they were all trying out the food. It takes a lot of guts to eat a corn dog on live TV, so you got to hand it to him. Yeah.
Eating a corn dog, especially if you're running for a leader of state, like a prime minister or president. I think it's now well known. Don't ever do that in a campaign stop or a cob of corn.
Yes. Okay. Really intricate sort of references. I'm not necessarily sure about.
Yeah, stick to donuts. Donuts are easy.
Yeah. Donuts are non-controversial, right?
Here, I'm going to give you a controversial take on donuts just before we leave here. You probably have a lot of these donut shops that aren't chains that have popped up in New York, right?
Sure.
So we're having those pop up in Canada, and I'm not naming any names, but what I've found is the non-chain donut places, the donuts aren't good.
Oh.
The donuts are like dense and heavy, and they taste like a piece of cake that is gone bad.
That sounds so good, though.
They aren't soft
like a nice,
and chewy.
Oh. But
I don't know.
Isn't that like what sometimes you get at? I mean, not Tim Hortons is my favorite. It's great, but like
Tim Hortons.
Dunkin'
See,
Donuts,
that's the thing. My kids, like we love donuts, and they always go back. They're like, "I'm sorry, but Timmy's donuts are better.
They are.
They're better than
consistent.
this $8 donut we just paid."
They're $8 donut, Jesus.
Oh yeah, the specialty donuts are freaking expensive, and you think, okay, for this price, this is gonna be a good donut, and you're like, you're trying to like it, and you're like, this ain't good.
I think it's a Canadian thing. So I haven't seen a whole lot of pop-up donut shops. There's definitely more like cupcakes and like sweets and that kind of stuff. But say those birthday party Timbits, it's like amazing. Always the same. It's like McDonald's. You know when you're going to get it. It's going to taste exactly how you want it to. And that's what we want you guys to like here on the show, to come here and know that you are going to taste the exact same thing you had last time. Because
it's the worst segue ever.
We're actually not like that at all. We're like,
yeah, that's horrible. I'm not going back to the restaurant. Oh, it's the same thing again.
No, it's
consistent. What you're trying to say is consistency.
Reliable.
Consistency.
Yes, consistency. You're when you come here, you know you're going to get something that you don't know what it actually is. That's our consistency. Toronto Sports Rush. Let's go.
Let's go, baby.
Thanks for watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.